Many great stories take place in the aftermath of a war. Fallout, Game of Thrones, Fear and Hunger Termina. The events of Termina take place directly after the end of World War II, and it's clearly left psychological scars on the characters and the wider world itself. As a result, themes of war, imperialism, and violence are ever present in the narrative of the game. Parts of Breheville are visual microcosms of the wider war. Vibrant streets reduced to lifeless rubble, armed soldiers gunning down civilians, and grotesque experiments running rampant. In all of this chaos and madness, a single question comes to mind. How did it come to this? History is filled with warmongers and heroes. The only line separating them is victory, and nobody blurs that line more than the Kaiser. In 1922, the eponymous Kaiser emerged from the shadows and began giving speeches to the people of Bremen, which won the hearts and minds of the rich and poor alike. Not much is known about the man before 1922, where he came from, what he was. Even his actual name is lost. The Kaiser persona is his most dominant identity. In the mid-1930s, he would become the leader of the Bremen Empire. A few short years later, the world would be thrust into a war. The Bremen Empire, the Kingdom of Rondon, and the Eastern Sanctuaries would be the main participants. The Kaiser has his own reason for the war, but how did he convince an entire empire to go along with it? In our world, Germany suffered defeat in World War I, have some of that, which was to its own citizens a great surprise. This was for two key reasons: the effectiveness of the German military's own propaganda campaigns, and the fact that most Germans never directly saw the war. So when a group of political radicals came about and started proclaiming that the country was betrayed by its own political class, it was easy to believe. We can probably assume then that the Kaiser likewise played on the scars of cultural humiliation and national pride to galvanize the Bremen Empire into action. The Kaiser led a populist movement that fought violently against the aristocratic classes of Bremen. The finer details of this are unknown to most outside of the empire, but many of the aristocracy who weren't killed ended up becoming refugees. The Kaiser's flag is black and yellow, likely resembling our very own flag for the Holy Roman Empire, which might indicate that he purported himself to be some kind of restorationist, though I could be reading too far into that. The 20th century saw 2 world wars in our world, and in the world of Fear and Hunger, it seems that both wars also happened, but we get little to no information on what the first conflict was like. Really, we don't even know that many specifics about the second one. From what we can gather, much of the war seemed to be trench-based. We also know that many states, particularly in the eastern part of Europa, recruited a part of their army from wardens of the state, or orphans, to use a more direct term, and that more than a few of the survivors would develop addictions to drugs, some that would numb the pain, and others that would supercharge them. The National Socialists of Germany had a fascination with eugenics and the concept of a superior race, and this is reflected in the Bremen. Their elite troopers are a nightmare on the battlefield, possessing the strength and size of 2 men. How the Kaiser developed such troops is currently unknown, but what is clear is their effectiveness, with just one being enough to effortlessly hold back multiple combatants. There's an uncanniness to their body and proportion that doesn't look quite right to the naked eye. The crimes of the Bremen are known far and wide. This includes the use of chemical weapons, hallucinogens, gases, but perhaps the most disturbing of all is their advancements in tank warfare. Its extremities seem to have the same versatility as a human being, making it far more ambulant than the tanks of Rondon in the Eastern Union. Nobody knows how the Bremen created them. There isn't any record of one successfully being taken down, so its study has thus far proved impossible, although some poor traumatized fools have sweared up and down that they could hear one speak with multiple voices. But this is likely just shell shock induced hallucination. Nobody quite knows what happens behind the Bremen's fog of war, and far-fetched fables about talking tanks and scantily clad gimps don't help matters. But what we do know is that they're a military force more advanced than any other, and deprived of all morality. Rondon, meanwhile, is a fusion of France and England, both of which were imperial powerhouses for centuries before the rise of America in the mid-20th century, and both of which were devastated by the Axis powers. A similar thing likely happened in Fear and Hunger's universe, which may have been why Rondon and the Eastern Sanctuaries were elated to accept the Kaiser's terms of peace. What of America, though? In the Fear and Hunger universe, America is known as Vinland, which translates to the Wine Land in the language of Oldegard. Not named such because of the abundance of its grape crop, nor for the colour of its skyline at sunset, but rather because the only way to recover from the trauma of going there is to gorge yourself on wine. A trade route was established there in 1577, but further colonisation of the land has proven fruitless. One Vatican scholar described it as looking like a black, endless mass, whose soil contains minerals that reject sunlight and warmth. While the greater powers and governments of the world have been aware of this land since the 16th century, mankind has little to no influence there, and its discovery is generally considered a mistake. And thus there would be no new world stepping forth to rescue and liberate the old, and as a result, the war ended on Bremen terms. The war came to an abrupt end sometime after September 1942, when Kaiser finally agreed to hold peace talks shortly after capturing Preheville, the backwater capital city of the fledgling nation of Bohemia. The Eastern Sanctuaries were the former occupiers of the territory, and were happy to give it up to the Kaiser. In fact, to any outsider, Preheville just appears to be an unremarkable city in Eastern Europa, whose best days are behind it. So the question becomes, why would the ambitious military genius settle for some peddling backwater in the middle of nowhere? What was all this chaos and misery for? Does he know something nobody else does? Well, maybe. Rumours abound that Preheville isn't the squalid backwater it presents itself as. Its priests hold to extreme, borderline blasphemous ideals. The dead old god Venushka shows signs of life in the forests and wildlife surrounding the city, and Preheville itself is actually older than any historical record. In fact, all historical documents agree that the city's great tower in its centre is a structure that has existed since the dawn of human civilization, and should you find yourself in the heart of the old city, in the right club, or outside the old town, you might even hear talk of bizarre experiments, but that's probably just crazy talk. War does strange things to a man's head after all. Baseless conspiracies are abundant. When the Kaiser agreed to meet at the table of peace, the world let out a collective sigh of relief. But anyone in the know realizes that when it comes to the Kaiser, there is no true peace. Only a lull. But not all of the world is embroiled in chaos and mayhem. In fact, throughout Termina we find multiple examples of what the world beyond Preheville is like. And we'll find out more about it next time.